It's been so many years. Why hasn't this case been solved?
Well, if you were to ask me, I would say it is solved. I would say that it's solved but unprosecuted.
They tell it every year like it was just another drive-by. Another Los Angeles night that went wrong. Another chapter in hip-hop history that ended in tragedy instead of triumph. The headlines stay the same, the documentaries recycle the same clips. And the conclusion is always simple enough to digest. But the streets never tell the story that way. The streets whisper, and whispers usually carry the truth people are too afraid to say out loud. What happened to the notorious Big, Christopher Wallace, was not random, not accidental. And not just a product of street beef spilling into Hollywood lights. It was planned. It was calculated. It was set in motion long before that final night in LA. Biggie moved through those last months believing he still had control over his destiny. But the game he was playing in had already grown bigger than beats, bars, and fame. This wasn't about music anymore. This was about power, ownership, and a move Biggie was never supposed to make. By the mid-1990s, Biggie Smalls wasn't just a rapper. He was the backbone of Bad Boy Records and the face of East Coast hip-hop. He put Brooklyn on the map when the industry had almost written it off. His voice carried the weight of the streets, his lyrics turned real-life pain into art. And his success rebuilt New York's dominance in a game that had started leaning west. The bad boy machine exploded because of him. Sean Puffy Combs became a mogul, radio stations stayed on repeat. And the champagne never stopped popping. From the outside, it looked like the dream every artist chased. Money, fame, influence, respect. But the truth about the music industry is that success doesn't always mean freedom. And fame often comes wrapped in contracts that feel more like chains than rewards. Behind closed doors, Biggie was living inside a golden cage. He was making millions, but ownership told a different story. His masters weren't his. His publishing wasn't fully his. Major decisions about his career still required permission. He was the engine driving the entire operation, yet he couldn't move freely. The same system celebrating him was quietly controlling him. Over time, the shine of the bad boy image started to wear off. And what remained underneath looked less like luxury and more like restriction. Biggie had carried the whole label on his back, made other people richer than they had ever imagined, and still found himself boxed in. That wasn't how real ones operated, and deep down, Big knew it. Late nights in the studio slowly changed their meaning. They weren't just about perfecting verses or chasing hits anymore. They became moments of realization. Moments where Biggie started asking the questions most artists are too scared to ask. Why am I the star but not the owner? Why does everyone around me have control except me? Why does my crown feel rented instead of earned? Those questions don't just create frustration, they create plans. Quiet ones. Dangerous ones. Biggie didn't explode publicly or start industry beef. Instead, he moved smart. Studio sessions turned into hush-hush phone calls. Not with promoters or radio executives, but with lawyers who understood how the industry really worked. Lawyers who didn't just push paperwork, but knew how to tear contracts apart piece by piece. Biggie started plotting his exit the same way a hustler plans a major move, low-key, smooth, and precise. No slip-ups allowed. This wasn't about drama. It was about survival and legacy. He wanted what had always belonged to him, his masters, his publishing. Full ownership of his music and his future. The hip-hop industry had been feeding off his talent for years, eating off him like roaches on crumbs, and Big was done being the meal. He was ready to burn the whole setup down and rebuild from the ashes on his own terms. That kind of thinking doesn't sit well in an industry built on control. When an artist realizes his worth and decides to walk away, the system starts paying attention. Word began circulating quietly that Biggie had been meeting with other label heads behind the scenes. Real power players. People offering him independence, real money, and real authority. These weren't just business conversations. They were discussions about building an empire. A setup where Big could call his own shots, control his output, and shape his future without interference. He wasn't just thinking about himself either. Big had plans to take Junior Mafia with him, to build a new label from the ground up. One that would give Brooklyn artists a fair chance to eat without getting robbed blind by contracts written in snake language. His vision was bigger than charts or awards. It was about ownership, legacy, and changing the rules of the game. But power never gives itself up quietly. The moment Biggie started positioning himself for independence, the energy around him shifted. Phone calls felt colder. Conversations became guarded. The industry smiles stayed in place, but the tension underneath grew thicker. Big may not have seen every threat clearly, but he felt the resistance. Still, he kept moving. Because once you understand the truth about control, there's no going back to ignorance. He had already said the words that mattered most, "I'm out," and once that decision was made, The plan was already in motion. Los Angeles in 1997 was a dangerous place for Biggie. Even without the East Coast-West Coast feud hanging in the air, still, he showed up. Award weekend. Industry parties. Cameras everywhere. From the outside, it looked like business as usual. But beneath the surface, forces were aligning. That night wasn't chaos. It was opportunity. A black SUV, a red light. A few seconds that changed hip-hop history forever. Shots rang out and the dream collapsed in real time. By morning, the industry had its explanation ready. Another drive-by. Another tragedy. Another chapter closed. But too many things never added up. The timing. The silence. The deals that died with him. The independence that never came to life. Biggie Smalls was gone, but the system he was trying to escape remained perfectly intact. His death froze his plans and protected the power structure he was about to challenge. And that's the part of the story no one likes to talk about. Today, Biggie's legacy is untouchable. His music lives on, his influence shapes generations, and his name remains legendary. But the lesson buried beneath his story still matters. Ownership is dangerous. Independence scares powerful people. And freedom in the music industry always comes at a price. They can call it a drive-by. They can call it coincidence. But the streets remember it differently. This wasn't just about violence. This was about a man who realized his worth and tried to take back control. And in doing so, made the move he was never supposed to make. Homies who had been down since day one started feeling off. Not loud about it. Not obvious. Just subtle shifts that only someone who grew up watching corners and reading faces would notice. Conversations got shorter. Calls went unanswered. Familiar faces stopped pulling up the way they used to. And when they did, their eyes told stories their mouths wouldn't finish. Biggie's circle tightened overnight, not because he wanted distance, but because he understood one rule better than most: when money gets involved, loyalty becomes a rumor. Big started moving like a man who knew the walls had ears and the streets had mouths. Every step was measured. Every word was weighed. He stopped speaking freely, even around people who had once felt like family. The industry had a way of flipping friends into witnesses and turning ambition into a liability. In Big's world, paranoia wasn't madness, it was survival. Even Puffy started acting different. Not aggressive. Not hostile. Just colder. Smiles that didn't reach his eyes. Questions that felt less like curiosity and more like quiet interrogations. Puffy had always been sharp, always strategic. But now every conversation felt like it was being logged somewhere. Big noticed how meetings stretched longer than necessary. How ownership came up more often than creativity. How future plans sounded more like containment strategies than growth. Big knew the rules of the game. You don't just walk away from empires built on your name. You don't tell people who made millions off your voice that you're done playing your role. That's not how clean exits happen. That's how careers get buried. That's how reputations get smeared. And sometimes, that's how bodies end up cold while headlines look the other way. The music industry was never just about beats and rhymes. It was about leverage, ownership, control, keeping the talent productive but dependent. Keeping the artist loud but powerless. From the moment Big signed that deal, the trap was already set. Not with bars you could see, but with paperwork, percentages, and clauses buried deep enough to feel invisible until you tried to leave. Big wasn't just trying to leave bad boy records. He was trying to escape an entire system designed to keep him profitable but replaceable. A machine that didn't reward independence, it punished it. And machines like that don't like losing their biggest earners. They don't like disruption. They don't like artists realizing their worth. Some cages don't look like cages. Some exits aren't meant to be found. The deeper Big pushed toward independence, the quieter things got around him. Meetings stopped being casual. Conversations stopped being friendly. Everything started happening behind closed doors. That's when the Manhattan meeting happened, the one nobody ever talks about. The call came through on a line Big didn't even know people had access to. No caller ID, no introduction. Just a calm voice giving a time and an address in Midtown Manhattan. No label names. No music talk. Just instructions. Show up alone. Don't bring security. Don't tell anyone where you're going. That was the moment Big understood this wasn't a regular business meeting. Real business doesn't need secrecy like that. Power does. He rolled up around midnight. The hour when New York is still breathing but corporate buildings go silent. The kind of quiet that makes footsteps echo louder than they should. The building didn't look like it belonged to anyone in the music industry. No plaques. No posters. No gold records on the walls. Just steel, glass, and silence. The lobby was empty except for one man in a suit who looked more federal than corporate. Not security. Not concierge. Something else. The kind of presence that doesn't introduce itself. The kind that already knows your name. Big didn't like it, but Big kept moving. Inside, the air felt heavier. Conversations were short. The message was clear even without words: you don't walk away from what you helped build. You don't take ownership without consequences. You don't rewrite contracts that other people depend on to stay powerful. Big walked out of that meeting with no paperwork, no handshakes, and a feeling he couldn't shake. Something had shifted. The game wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. After that night, things accelerated. Rumors started spreading quietly. Deals slowed down. Doors that had always been open suddenly needed appointments. Media narratives shifted subtly. The same industry that once praised Big as the voice of a generation started framing him as difficult, unpredictable, hard to manage. That's how the machine works. If it can't control you, it reframes you. Big kept pushing anyway. He wanted his masters, his publishing, his future. He wanted Junior Mafia free from contracts written in legal snake language. He wanted Brooklyn artists to eat without getting robbed blind. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was chasing ownership. That scared people. Because when one artist breaks free, others start asking questions. And questions are dangerous. By the time Big landed in Los Angeles, the tension was already baked in. Award weekend. Industry energy everywhere. Smiles, handshakes, cameras flashing. But beneath the surface, something felt wrong. Big felt it. People around him felt it. The air was thick with unspoken warnings. He still moved like himself. Still confident. Still larger than life. But the circle was tighter than ever. Trust had become currency, and Big wasn't spending it freely. That night, history froze. Officially, they called it another tragedy. Another example of hip-hop violence. Another case of wrong place, wrong time. A convenient story that required no deeper questions. But the streets never bought it. Too much didn't add up. The timing. The silence. The deals that were never finalized. The independence that never happened. Big was gone, but the system stayed exactly the same. And that's the part nobody likes to talk about. Biggie Smalls didn't just die as a rapper. He died as a man trying to reclaim ownership in an industry that profits from control. His story isn't just about music. It's about power structures. About what happens when talent realizes it's worth more than the deal it signed. They say he was taken by street violence. But the truth feels colder than that. This was about a move he was never supposed to make. For decades, the official story surrounding the death of Christopher Wallace, known to the world as the Notorious B.I.G., has been repeated without challenge. A tragic drive-by shooting. Another chapter in the violent East Coast-West Coast rivalry. Another unsolved murder blamed on chaos and coincidence. But beneath the surface of that familiar narrative lies a far darker and more complex story, one built on missing records, altered timelines, and evidence that allegedly vanished before it could ever reach the public. According to multiple sources who later came forward, flight logs connected to the final days of Biggie's life revealed passengers who never officially existed, names missing from manifests, seats occupied by individuals who did not appear in any public record. Even more disturbing were flight routes that did not align with sworn depositions given years later, and timestamps that directly contradicted where certain individuals claimed to be when Biggie was killed. These discrepancies were not minor clerical errors. They were systematic inconsistencies that suggested deliberate manipulation. Among the most explosive pieces of alleged evidence were audio recordings captured through hidden microphones during Biggie's final flight. These tapes, according to insiders, contained conversations between so-called ghost passengers, people who were never supposed to be on that plane. The tone of these discussions was chilling. There was no emotion, no hesitation. Biggie's situation was discussed not as a human life at risk, but as a problem to be managed. Words like containment, liability, and extraction were allegedly used, framing this situation more like a corporate risk assessment than a criminal act. What made these recordings even more disturbing was their subject matter. Biggie's desire to leave existing business arrangements, his growing independence, and his refusal to remain controlled were openly discussed. According to the tapes, his intention to get out was no longer seen as a negotiation issue, it was viewed as a threat. The conversations reportedly described the Los Angeles operation with cold precision, laying out logistics, coordination, and timing as if planning a merger rather than a murder. Allegedly, the recordings also referenced payments to local assets and intermediaries. There were mentions of coordination with individuals familiar with law enforcement procedures, ensuring minimal interference and maximum confusion once the event took place. Even more alarming was how closely the timeline discussed on these recordings matched Biggie's final hours. Movements, locations, and delays reportedly lined up down to the minute, suggesting that nothing about that night was left to chance. But the tapes were only one piece of the puzzle. Photographic evidence allegedly existed as well images that painted a picture of prolonged surveillance. Photos showed Biggie attending meetings he never knew were being documented. Grainy shots captured from vehicles trailing him through Los Angeles streets. Still images showed the exact intersection where he would later be killed, photographed days in advance as if someone was scouting angles, traffic patterns, and escape routes. This wasn't opportunistic violence. It looked methodical. Investigators who later reviewed descriptions of these materials said the evidence pointed to something far beyond street-level conflict. This wasn't about rap beef or impulsive retaliation. The scope, funding, and organization required suggested a conspiracy involving individuals with access to resources, far exceeding those of the music industry alone. According to those familiar with the material, this operation required logistics, silence, and influence elements that street rivalries simply don't provide. The individual who allegedly discovered the stash of evidence understood its significance immediately. Realizing what it could expose, they attempted to bring it to journalists and investigators who had